just based on the original question, I went down a rabbit hole.
You answered it. What Canada does with its waste?
Well, I have a nuclear power plant in Canada, it's a great big swimming pool. And the heat, the fuel transport mechanism that we use is we have on-power refueling, and we just take the fuel out of the reactor, and then it gets taken to the fuel bay, and it sits there and glows blue for its life. Very boring, very
So,
safe.
Galen, so what I'm hearing from you is what prohibits the US from doing the modular or the investing in one design is perhaps just their capitalism?
Would it be rude if I said yes?
No.
But what you've got is some brilliant people putting their very best ideas on the table in competition with each other. And and because of the dynamics around it, my sense is the best technical solutions will win. The competition is happening very broadly. And going modular has cost and safety benefits that are well worth considering.
Next question addresses uranium mining. Can you address the safety precautions and maybe if you can contrast uranium mining that was done during our nuclear age versus what's being done now? How is it different?
There are, I'll say one, I'm certainly not an expert on this field, so what specifically is changed within regulation, I am not certain, actually. But I mentioned MOAB earlier. I know that that led to different rules around, at the very least, like dust from a tailings pile. How are you going to actually manage exposure to the public with this rock that's effectively sitting there? So that's one example. The nuclear industry in general, a thing happens and the industry learns from it. That's true of mining. This is reflected in mining at large. Mining deaths have gone down globally. Certainly the technologies are getting more advances. We're getting more technology into there. Within uranium mining in general, that's switched to in situ leaching. Is the typical way that's done. That's a chemical process. So there's not necessarily like mining, digging out rock. Quite necessary. You soak the porous rocks, and it will selectively remove the uranium. And effectively, you have a chemical plant as opposed to a mining industry necessarily.
Is there a proposed Bluffdale enrichment facility? And is it more for hardware manufacturing? Does this mean reactor component fabrication? And will we ever enrich uranium there?
Is that yeah, that's shown reference, right? Yeah. So and if you're not getting that, I'm absolutely terrible with names and locations by now. I am. So General Matters, they have got a couple public statements out. They're one of the awardees of some federal funding to do enrichment in general, but the Utah facility is component manufacturing, as far as we are aware.
When might Utah give the green light to start building an SMR?
I mean, research-wise, right? Yeah. So the NRC is currently undergoing regulatory reform, I might say. That is supposed to finish last year. It did not. So we're all sort of waiting to see what that looks like. That's going to be part 53. If you want to follow all of those lovely regulations, I do not personally recommend it. But that stance is changing. The other big shift happening in federal regulation is around Valera. You've maybe seen this. That is a different but maybe parallel process, you might say. But the point being, the siting of small modular reactors under the ideal circumstances, a risk-aware framework is sort of the way it's pitched, or you'll see it pitched, is still developing. So, open question, it is not under Utah's purview, that is under federal purview. Assume that does happen. What then happens, how might it be sited? Well, if you're meeting the required siting requirements, and you're a private industry, or you're a utility, going after it, you'll have to do a bunch of studies to make sure your location is safe and viable before you can even start construction. You'll do community engagement, and then you build it the same as you build anything else. It's nothing particularly special. It's mostly concrete, steel.
All right, I'm gonna push you a little bit. What are we, 10, 15 years away?
Oh, when might the industry exist? Ooh. Some people will tell you 2 years from now. I have seen no evidence to make a sweeping conclusion there. There's an earlier question on like how many technologies win out. Probably a couple do. That's what I would suspect. But to the point, there are many, many companies competing. However, a molten salt reactor is better at certain things than a high gas temperature reactor. And it is better at certain things than a microreactor that uses heat pump or something. They're what I would love to see, and what we'll see if it comes out of the industry competition, is what technology wins out in which niche, and then how quickly can they scale their development. Like I said, no one has a manufacturing plant. More importantly, no one has a supply chain. We don't even manufacture the fuel for these things. The existing fuel for the research reactors for Battle, for instance, it's old national lab fuel, essentially. There's not a commercial fuel vendor for TRISO, for HALEU in the United States, and globally, that was mostly coming through Russia. And obviously, recent conclusions there have shifted that look. So there needs to be a domestic fuel supply chain for any at-scale manufacturer. Your guess is as good as mine is to time. I don't know, 10, 15 years, depends how much money people want to spend on it, really.
Okay, molten salt sounds like it is something considerably warmer than water. How is molten salt able to cool a reactor?
Language precision. Molten salt. Oh, yes, good idea. Molten salt does not cool. Think of it more as molten salt is the heat transport mechanism. So you take the heat from the reactor, and you take it by having molten salt as being able to absorb the heat and transport it to where that heat is then going to be used and converted to electricity. Okay, for certain audiences that would make complete sense as a statement, and for others it won't.
Yeah. You're ahead of me. So what we're really getting at is that there's internal reactor components. This is where your molten salt's going to act. Potentially over here is where your molten salt acts. I've seen some designs that want to do this. But this is your cooling loop. Cooling is external to the reactor design. It is a physical reality of using heat. It also is what leads to really low efficiencies for every thermal power plant, essentially. You'll see like 33% efficiency is the cap. Yeah, using water to do stuff is really, really hard, really low efficiency. Phase transitions suck, they're super parasitic. There's no easy way to say that. But whatever inventive thing you do here is going to be your cooling loop. The rest of it is just power generation and heat transfer. The thing that you need to be managing internal to the reactor is making sure that you're pulling enough heat off that you don't get a nuclear meltdown. That is a conclusion of a million different factors. And it's an efficiency question, it's a power generation question. It's like complicated topics, it's easy to know.
And concluded by TRISO fuel design.
Yeah, which again, is meltdown proof. That's the whole goal.
All right, how many acres of land do you need for a modular nuclear plant? And how many kilowatts does this generate? And where and what market would a micronuclear plant service?
Couple of acres for including make small modular.
The physical footprint of the plant is not tied to the zone that it takes up. Well, it is tied to it, but it's always significantly smaller. Might be the easy way to say that. So the building infrastructure is low. Your physical size impact, your fence line is going to be set by those emergency planning zones and general regulation guidelines. So yeah, a couple of acres. What market might it serve? I mentioned microreactors. Might serve a hospital. Essentially, the way you want to be doing your demand in general. So these are megawatts. 1,000 more than a kilowatt. Everyone knows that. No harm, no foul. The data center scale of energy is up in the gigawatts. You could site it next to a large conventional reactor. That's why they're interested in restarting existing large reactors. They have enough demand to meet that much power. Pretty much no one else does. That's an interesting paradigm shift that's happened recently. I'm not going to go into it now. Microreactors in particular, 10 megawatts, that's a particularly heavy industrial facility. That is cities level of power. So if you had a particularly technologically advanced, for instance, with a bunch of EV chargers, if you needed a bunch of electricity, that might be your community, that might be your city that would want a microreactor, and that's just your local power source. That's totally fine. If you go smaller than that, you get more flexible with your demand. So the question you really need to ask is, okay, how much demand do I have and what industry needs that? Data centers command tons, everyone else commands significantly less. Hospitals have a reliability component that makes nuclear particularly interesting. That's also secondary. Yep, if you run on generators, again, we mentioned mining communities, the flexibility is incredible.
We have to prevent the ratepayers from carrying the cost of producing energy. Well, so why wouldn't data centers in the future just entertain putting in a couple micro reactors to power them?
Repeat that, I'll repeat it to the room.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, amen, sister. Yeah, they are as you answer. So there's a question of availability, which we already touched on supply chain, right? You can't go out and buy these things. Commercially, they don't exist. So what can you buy on the market right now today? Primarily, existing supply chains, very limited natural gas, very limited solar. Data centers typically don't have an energy use profile, a demand that is suitable to solar. It gets really complicated. You're gonna have to do a ton of storage. That makes the cost go way up to have they want to be online all the time. Their demand isn't constant, but their availability is. They'll call it 5 times reliability, meaning they want to be up 99.999% of the time, essentially all the time, right? Intermittent are particularly ill suited to that. The pivot that many of the more environmentally conscious have at least committed to is we will build natural gas now, and then in conjunction build our nuclear when available, and then the natural gas becomes a backup. Because you want your backup, your nuclear reactor is going to go down at some point, your refueling cycles depends on technology, and I'll keep it hitting that drum. But it's in the conversation.
All right, I know we're running a little long, we'll need to wrap up. I'm just going to ask a couple more questions here because I know people are pretty anxious to wrap up. If we build a 1 gigawatt of small modular reactor capacity used out, how much nuclear waste would be produced over 100 years?
Small, yeah. I don't have the plant numbers off the top of my head. I can tell you, the United States, I gave a number, has 100,000 metric tons. The nuclear industry at large produces about 2,000, 2,500, if I remember correctly, of nuclear waste. Comparable nuclear waste profiles, someone's gonna have to do the math for me. I do not know off the top of my head how many gigawatts of nuclear capacity we have installed, but effectively, if you installed an equal amount of small modulars, it'd be about the same amount of waste. And then you're dividing by whatever number, whatever capacity you have. You do this stuff on sort of like a per megawatt hour produced calculation. You can look up tables for it. I do not have them on hand or memorize.
We have about 100 gigawatts.
So 100 gigawatts, if you're talking 300, you're 1,000 times less. That would be about a metric ton. If you're going that 2,000 limit, 1 to 2, something like that.
Okay, on some of these questions, I think we've covered summing some of these up a little bit or shortening them. Who will own Utah's nuclear?
It depends. We can rapid fire these if you want to try that.
Say that again.
We can rapid fire these questions if we want to try to get through them.
Yeah, but a lot of them, I think so let's just summarize and make sure we have it right on the waste issue. So the hub, the concept is saying it would be stored, ideally it would be stored right there on site.
Yeah, if you're gonna do a nuclear reactor, on-site storage makes sense. The hub also includes like interim storage and recycling. We haven't touched on recycling at all.
Why don't you go ahead and do that? Just explain the recycling.
Would we like to? Okay, cool. So really quickly, a visual will make this faster. I do promise. Top line navigate. What does nuclear recycling do for you? I'm gonna pause here momentarily. Spent nuclear fuel. What's it made up of? You use uranium, goes into fission, and you generate Current nuclear fuel cycles, half the periodic table, in varying quantities, depends on time, depends on technology. That's not realistically going to change with small modular reactors. If you are using a fission chain for your power source, you will generate a whole bunch of different things. That changes reactor physics, that's why you refresh the fuel, but the point being that we want to really highlight is why is recycling even in the conversation? Well, when fuel comes out of a reactor, you've got about, those are hard to read, so that's a 90%, that's a 5%. You've got about 95% of the original energy content that you mined out. 5% of it is made up of all of those other components. So what does recycling propose to do? You can do a bunch of things with it, but one of them would be separate out plutonium and uranium, make it a new fuel. It's called MOX. France does this. And then the rest of the material, I'm calling this a value extraction loop. Basically, they're scarce materials, those medical isotopes, that are either incredibly hard to make, incredibly hard to manufacture, or a very, very, very scarce supply that's used from electric vehicles, that's used in medical procedures. Molybdenum-99, to pull out one, is a particularly important medical imaging isotope. I believe that's what's used in these images. But essentially, the medical isotopes, radioisotopes are the foundation to medical, modern medicine. You need them. They're in critical supply. They're in all of your diagnostics. They're in a lot of your treatments. So that supply is a main health concern. Certain reactors are better at some of that stuff. Spent nuclear fuel has quantities of this that are incredibly valuable. The secondary advantage of recycling is you heavily reduce the amount of fuel you need to store. You're removing the majority of the content, right? So you go from needing this whole cave full to fill this number of casks, to down to this, and this is, I believe, an 80% reduction, if I remember my math correctly, something like that. So it's got a bunch of different advantages, obviously.
Okay, how will current changes in radiation standards play into permitting?
Oh, boo. Great question. We don't know. How much can I get a time check?
We gotta wrap it within 5.
Within 5? Okay, not nearly enough time. I'll ask Tracy to repeat the question. I don't remember verbatim.
How will current changes in radiation standards play into permitting?
Yeah, one will say proposed changes. So if we were going to ask a whole bunch of questions, I was going to go into some radiation science. Someday someone will ask the question, I'll get to talk about it. It's one of my favorite topics. So if you catch me at another event, please ask me. I got DNA damage. There we go. Let's break it a little bit. So let me talk very briefly about what is the regulation change even being imposed. So ALERA standards as low as reasonably achievable. That is the foundational nuclear standard based on radiation dose. We've sort of covered that already. That's what's sort of being assessed from the radiation safety sector. The rest of it is all permitting and correct systems. I think we've covered that. This is sort of the last thing we haven't really touched. What is the existing standard? Linear non-threshold. Complicated topic. I'm not going to know the science behind it, but effectively, it's been a back and forth discussion for many, many decades. The scientific consensus appears to have shifted. There are 2 entities that still use linear non-threshold as their idea of radiation danger at low risk. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the United States is one of them. However, the conversation moved beyond that. What does this assume? Really quickly, is that any amount of radiation, no matter what, is hazardous to you. Fair presumption, that's a linear relationship. So no matter your exposure, there is some amount of hazard. However, medicine doesn't work that way. Medicine works on a dose-response curve. It is a non-linear relationship in the vast majority of places. The other thing I'll point out is that you are surrounded by radiation all the time. All the time. Radiation is everywhere. Radiation hits your radium, telecommunications, sunlight, X-rays, radioactive sources. Ionizing radiation is your particularly dangerous stuff. If you've seen our billboard, that's where this banana comparison comes out of. Has potassium-40 that has a beta decay. You can tell I worked through my thing. Here's your types of ionizing radiation. This is pretty much it. So if you have a source that emits one of these things, it's technically hazardous to you. Could be hazardous to you, you should say. And there's different mechanisms behind them. The point being, you're surrounded by this at all points in time. The interesting data point I found on this today is that the potassium in your body is undergoing somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000, huge range, decays per second. Your body's great at dealing with radiation, low doses. We walk around in the sunlight. you have inbuilt DNA repair mechanisms. So the evolution of cancer from low doses of radiation is an incredibly imprecise science. It's why you see much discourse back and forth on it. But the consensus opinion essentially is that you're trying to measure something that is immeasurably small. It has an extremely limited impact in the grand scheme of things. What this does, just to scale this for you, how much radiation do you get? We have a banana scale. Again, true scale. Dental X-ray, 50 bananas worth. Average background daily radiation, this is one I have, 100. This is hugely dependent on elevation. This is hugely dependent on location. But you need about 100 bananas, and this is what you're getting just walking around. And you can Google this. There's a million different examples. It's one of the better sort of that's on our billboard. If you see our billboard. The only point I want to point out: flights. When's the last time you thought about taking a flight from a radiation hazard perspective? More than years of living. When's the last time you thought about that chest X-ray you're going to get? Okay, well, where do you need to get dangerous levels? There is no person on Earth, there is no entity on Earth that's eating 100 million bananas, right? So it's a somewhat unrealistic concern for the amount of dose that you see, and living within 50 miles of a nuclear reactor is like eating one banana. So the dose you get from being near these things is comparable to walking around in daylight. It's not an extreme concern. The regulations and protections are there. Obviously, if you touch spent fuel, incredibly hazardous. Don't do that. But you have to get to it, and it's sealed and safe.
All right, I'm gonna ask, or Galen, do you want to add anything to that?
We're good.
Okay. I'm gonna ask one more question, but before I do, I wanna just let you know that we have to get out of the room by 8:30 tonight, and I think, about Tim and Galen, if we didn't answer your question and you want to follow up, we're here, Tracy, Reese from the Department of Energy's here, and then Shannon, can you raise your hand back there? In the QR code in front of you that says, let's stay in touch, there's Shannon's emails on there. So if you have additional questions, they want to be available, and Shannon will get you the right expert and respond to your questions. So if we haven't done it well enough tonight, you want to follow up, please take that with you and stay in touch with the department. Okay, so Tim and Galen, last question. What is the risk in the United States if we don't pursue the innovation around advanced nuclear?
Great question.
Quality of life deterioration.
Can you expand on that?
The base load, the base generation capacity in North America is mostly based on hydraulic power. It took flooding to get there. Niagara Falls is one of the few examples where we did not have to do major construction and flooding. If we have to do more hydraulic, there will be more flooding. There are entire communities in southern Utah that don't exist anymore unless you're a diver and go look at them. Quality of life is also cold. We're running out of mountains that we can flatten in the Appalachians to get coal. Coal is a diminishing resource. It'll be there for a chunk more time, but after that, we're not killing off more dinosaurs. There's a limit to how much coal there is. So the two main baseload suppliers of power for stable grid operation, and I cannot emphasize the importance of grid stability, and that is a function of generation mix. Tim has spoken to that very clearly. If without nuclear as contributing, a main contributor for baseload generation, we're in a quality of life compromise.
I will, at the risk of time, show one more image. This one's really important. So we talked about generation mix. Why? So you want a diverse generation mix. Why? Publicly stated. There's grid operations, certainly. But what happens? And this is extremely in the weeds detail, so I'm not going to have to do it justice, but ask me later if you'd like to. What happens when you add in more and more and more of a resource? you get less market value from it. You increase your risk. You're tying yourself to a supply chain. We certainly see that with gas right now, right? And with the pump lately. But you are also forcing an operation that the grid may or may not want. And that's risky. So you want a diverse resource mix from a physics side, from a market side, from an economic side. And the interesting thing that happens, particularly with renewables are extremely susceptible to this because they have to be paired torage, and that increases your costs. If you're going to do intermittence as your clean baseload, if you want to try to run a grid off of something clean, very limited choices, solar's often thrown out, right? You start to get less and less and less effective, less and less and less monetary value. And what will happen at a certain point is if you drive that monetary value low enough, it is no longer an investment decision you can feasibly make because everyone has to compete for the same hours. So you're continuously iterating on a thing where there's a limited supply of money that you can get out of that. That's an issue. That's what this is sort of showing without going too much into it. And this is backed by, these are solar plants, this is penetration level. You see the value goes down as your penetration level increases. This is a real reality of the grid. It's still an evolving field. This was not in the conversation 10, 15 years ago. Some PhD somewhere probably thought this was happening, but there's real data behind this now. So it's an evolving conversation, but when I say systemic costs, this is the sort of stuff I'm talking about. You need to think larger than a single power plant.
Thank you both very much for being here tonight, and sharing your expertise, and Tracy and team for also coming to Park City. Can we give a round of applause? Thank you.